Okay.
Today is Friday, May 29th, 2015, and we are here today to interview Sister Mary Kelly. Our first question is, we would like to know about your journey of faith. What led you to the religious life?
I think what led me to religious life was being around sisters and seeing what they were like and getting to know them. I grew up on Mercy property. My father was the maintenance man at St. Joe's on the Boulevard, one of our hospitals now closed. And because he was the maintenance man and they thought it was a good idea to have him handy, they gave us a house to live in on the hospital property. So I grew up with Sisters of Mercy, literally. And at a certain point, I thought, I want to be like them. They, their lives were meaningful. They changed all kinds of things in the neighborhood. They ran this massive hospital, fed all kinds of people in the neighborhood out the back door with what was left over in the cafeteria at the end of the day. And they made it happen, and I admired them.
Is that why you chose the Sisters of Mercy over, say, another religious order?
Well, there were other things too. Kelly, Irish, community founded in Ireland. There are certain things that just make a match. And I did know other orders, but the Sisters of Mercy seemed like the best match.
As you were going through your training, what did you study?
As a sister, I came into the community at a point when sisters were allowed to complete bachelor's degrees before they went out to teach or nurse. In earlier years, the sisters would get some basic education and then complete their degrees in the summer over years and years and years. So I was fortunate enough to be able to I was 17 when I entered. And I started a bachelor's degree, and then after the first year as a postulant, took a year away from the bachelor's degree per se and focused on philosophy and theology. And that was routine for sisters in that era. So you had a special year called the canonical year, during which you study scripture, you study basic philosophy, do a lot of reading, Thomas Aquinas, those kinds of things, and focus on Catherine McCauley, who founded the order, so that we would be able to make the mercy charism real in this world by understanding it as she understood it and choose the works in our times that match that charism.
Now, approximately what year was this?
It would have been 65, because I entered in September of 64, so the 64-65 year, I was a college freshman and a postulant in the sisters order. And then the second year, 65-66, we would have done the special year, but that was also the year that we moved from the Mercy College campus to this campus in Farmington Hills.
The high school? Or
the building we're sitting in.
Oh, so as you were going through becoming a nun, you were also here. You were no longer on the Mercy campus.
Well, what happened was the Mercy campus initially housed several functions. The college was there, Mercy College, later called Mercy College of Detroit. The mother house of the order was there. So anybody coming into the community would have entered there, professed their vows there, and so on. And the high school was there. And in the 60s, it got pretty crowded with the baby boomers hitting college. And so what happened was the decision was made to take one of those, well, actually two of the functions, the high school and the administration of the order, off of that campus and leave that whole Mercy College campus available for expansion for the college.
Now, you entered about the time the Catholic Church was making a lot of changes.
Right.
How did that impact you?
It made one very flexible because what happened was there were a lot of, sort of cut and dried rules up until that point. And then the changes came very quickly after the Vatican Council ended and the documents were promulgated and people started thinking, well, what does this mean for us practically speaking? One of the things was modernizing the habit.
Right. Did you
So-
have a hard time with that? Or?
No.
No.
Because we were the last group to do lots of things. We were one of the last groups to be a group. A few years after I entered, women entered the community in much smaller numbers. We created our own habit one year, wore it the next year, and set it aside the year after that. So I was in the traditional Mercy habit for exactly 11 months. So you just had to keep figuring out, what was important, what wasn't important.
That didn't bother you to come out of the habit?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No, I mean,
Okay.
the habit was a wonderful symbol, but practically speaking, it was difficult to wear, something from the 1800s and go about your daily life.
Getting back to Mercy College, what was your role there?
At the old campus, I was a student and lived there. And then, as the college merged with the then University of Detroit, I became a faculty member.
So you were not a faculty member at Mercy College while it was just Mercy College?
Correct.
Okay, so you joined the staff somewhere around 1990 at,
Yes.
at the merger?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what did you do there? What are you doing there?
Well, I've had a couple of roles. I started in School of Architecture, assisting with the design center, which was being developed. I have an MBA and have done a lot of work with nonprofits, mostly financial work, but some organizational development. So when I first came, I helped the design center. Father Terry Curry was in charge of it at that point. Become like a small business seated within the School of Architecture. We developed an advisory board and set up procedures. They were doing a lot of work in and around Detroit with various community groups, so we had to handle billing and marketing and things like that. So that was the first thing I did. Then I was asked to fill in temporarily for 1 year in the College of Health Professions. Yes, you're getting it. It was 20 years ago. And
I think you're still there.
at that point, I was doing health administration, and the dean then was Dr. Cynthia Zane.
Oh, yes.
And she and the sister in charge of the community collaborated and decided that I would be the person to fill in this 1 year slot that was open. The chairmanship was open. And then not too long after that, the sister in charge of the community said, "Do you like it?" And of course I liked it. And she said, "Well, you better get a doctorate then if you want to stay." So while working, I got a doctorate at the University of Michigan, the School of Public Health.
Oh, wow. That must have been difficult to do.
It was a very intense 24 months. The coursework all happened in 24 months, and we were taking 5 classes at a time. Some of it was handled online, and it was a weekend program, and after they described it as a weekend program, then they told you that the weekend started Thursday morning at 8. So once a month, we would go from Thursday morning at 8, all day Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and get finished Sunday at 3. So we had about as much contact with the professors during those 4 days as you would have during a 3-credit course for a whole semester.
Did they lessen your hours at the university?
Well, there's a provision that if you're going to school, you can get a course release and maybe not teach 3 classes, but only 2. So
you were still teaching 2 courses.
Mhm. The good thing was it was all in the same area. This was the School of Public Health. I was teaching health administration, so. But it was a very intensive program. Then after you finish the coursework for 24 months, the next month you sit for comprehensive exams, and then you do your dissertation.
How long did it take for that?
Just under 2 years for my dissertation. I figured the only way to get it done was do it.
Just to get it done. Yeah.
But I was fortunate enough to be able to work with Trinity Health, and we did an analysis that they wanted to do anyway for quality. So it turned out to be a pretty meaningful project.
So they got it done for free?
Yes,
Pretty much.
And I got to use their data.
And you got your dissertation or your PhD out of it.
Mm-hmm.
As a Sister of Mercy, how do you see your work impact the students at? Well, we have Mercy College, but at the University of Detroit
Mhm.
Mercy, how do you see that?
Well, I really like interacting with students, and advising is actually one of my favorite things. sometimes I think I get some special students on my advising list because I tend to follow them fairly closely. And the students that I deal with primarily are adults. And people, I admire them so much because they've got their whole lives, they've got families, they've got jobs, and they're going to school. And often enough, the women who come back to school, they wanted to get a bachelor's degree, then they began a family, and it just wasn't possible, and then something else happened, and it just wasn't possible. So when they get back to school, they're very earnest students, but sometimes they're underprepared or just rusty. They haven't been in school for a number of years, and it really makes you want to help them because they're so intent on accomplishing a degree. I think what being a sister does is maybe makes me a little bit more available because I'm not necessarily running home to my own family. People at home would understand if I'm teaching in the evening, that's how it is. Meeting students in the evening, because if the students are in the workplace, that's probably when they're going to be
time they can meet with
available.
Right.
And to facilitate connections between the students and the other parts of the university, because they, especially part-time evening students, tend to come in and leave, and they don't know about the realm of services that we have. And so it's fun to be able to make some of those connections for them.
That's cool. How has the ministry of the Sisters of Mercy changed over the years?
When the Sisters of Mercy started, Catherine McCauley was really focused on women who were living in the streets because of the poverty at that time in Ireland, and their children. So she established some schools. She also established some job training programs. And, it feels like a pretty direct link for me when I look at what I've done at least the last 20 years, because working with adult students who are primarily women, it's really close to what Catherine was doing, providing them with the tools they need to have a life that has some economic stability for them and for their children. Before I came to the university, well, I guess most of what I've done in terms of my own ministry is teaching. I started out as a high school teacher and did that for 10 years. And then when the community asked me if I would be the financial officer for the community, I went back to school and got an MBA while working again. I never seem to have sorted that out. But then once I had the MBA, I worked with a variety of nonprofits on the financial side, because that's often the tough part for nonprofits. So I spent 5 years at the COTS shelter in downtown Detroit. We were in a former hotel owned by the Anhut family that owned the Botsford Inn, and this hotel had been rehabbed on a couple of floors, and while I was there, we got all 8 floors rehabbed and in use for homeless guests, a lot of whom at that point were women with children. But, handling the grants, reporting on the funds, fundraising, all of those things were pieces that I did at COTS. And Catherine McCauley is very well known for making connections between the rich and the poor. And so when I was in the role as the controller at COTS, it felt pretty much like that's what I was doing. It was a more contemporary expression of that.
Now, is that the one on Connors?
It's not on Connors. What's on Connors is one of our former hospitals. It used to be St. Joseph Mercy Hospital on East Grand Boulevard, and then it became Samaritan when it moved to Connors. COTS is on Peterborough Street, just off of Woodward.
Okay, I thought COTS was on Connors. My mistake, I'm sorry. How have you lived out, I think you've kind of, I'd like you to expound on this, the mission of the Sisters of Mercy and the mission of the University of Detroit Mercy, and how are they related or interrelated?
When we take vows as Sisters of Mercy, it's pretty typical for women religious to take 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. And we take a 4th vow, which is to serve in mercy. And so, that's sort of our starting premise. And the way we tend to think about mercy isn't just attention to those in need, in terms of feeling sympathy for them, but it also includes the concept of doing something about it. And I think at the university, because of our location in the city, we have lots of opportunities to do something
True.
about what needs to be done. And so I see the missions as going together. Our Jesuit colleagues are more likely to be in higher education than Sisters of Mercy because we have a slightly broader perspective. They're more focused on universities. We have universities, but we also have high schools and some grade schools, and we have a number of the big hospital systems, because whatever it takes to respond to somebody's need where they're suffering and make a change, generally now you want to make systemic changes. It doesn't take away relating to an individual, but when we deal with our big health systems, for example, here's a simple example that probably wouldn't have entered into the picture 150 plus years ago. We pay attention to the collection policies in the hospitals so that people who have big bills, we work with them in various ways to help them get the bills paid. We don't just send them off to a collection agency.
Oh, wow.
So that's an example of what I'm talking about when I say a systemic change. We influence that whole system, and we can say, this is how we want to do it in the spirit of mercy. People are suffering enough already if they're hospitalized. So let's work with them on payment plans and that kind of thing. And you can impact a large group of people with a single decision about a policy. We have had childcare for women who work on campuses of our various ministries. So a lot of our ministry now deals with systemic, but it also deals with the one-on-one. So some of what I was saying before about working with the adult women students at the university, most of us would send somebody very quickly to Sister Bridget for tutoring in math.
Yes.
Because we know that she'll deal with somebody one-on-one, help them get through. I send people to the writing center all the time. It's that lining things up for people so they can succeed. But it's support in a very practical way.
It's caring.
It is.
It's caring.
It is.
You have to want to care to do that. You're not. Our next question deals with if you were retired from academia and you're not. So where do you see your work going?
Well,
how long do you want to stay in academia?
forever.
Forever?
I really love to teach. I really love to teach, and even though I had a sabbatical a year ago, I did miss the teaching when I wasn't there. So I hope to be able to teach for as long as it's possible. But the other thing I've been working on the last couple of years that's been fun is a research project. I asked for the sabbatical so that I could do more intensive work on this. Maureen Anthony and I realized, because she's heard me say this over and over, that women religious get almost no recognition in the general history of the United States for founding hospitals. And there was a point in 1917 where women religious ran 50% of the hospitals in this country. And that's really overlooked in the general history. There are specialty books like published by the Catholic Health Association that would mention it, but it's a narrow band of people that know this. And I teach health administration, and in many of our courses there's going to be a chapter in the book that says this is the history of how hospitals developed in the United States. And I have found a single book with 2 sentences that mentions the contribution of women religious. So I asked for the sabbatical to do further work on that. We interviewed 70 former hospital administrator women religious and tried to find out from them what it was like to run that ministry. And we had intended to do 25, but it was a snowball technique, and everybody kept telling us about other sisters we should talk with. And we realized that nobody was ever going to talk to them if we didn't do it. So we expanded the study, and we did all 70. And pulling themes out of that research was just amazing. almost none of them thought they were going to be a hospital administrator. But they did it because somebody asked them to. And in a minute, let go of all of their personal aspirations for whatever they thought they were going to be doing in ministry the rest of their lives, and said yes. Most of them had advanced degrees in either hospital administration or business. They went to St. Louis U or a variety of places, got the training, because again, they were asked to, and took over these hospitals, some in their early 20s.
Wow.
They learned a lot. They loved the people they worked with. They felt like they made a contribution. They, managed million-dollar building projects.
Yeah.
They interacted with public officials, made all of these high-level decisions. And then, at a certain point, they could see that there weren't sisters coming behind them that wanted this kind of ministry. And so they carefully made plans to hand it over. And some of that was news to me. Although I had lived with a lot of these women, there were two distinct paths. Either they founded a health system that then put in place the infrastructure to run the individual hospitals when the sisters weren't going to be there, or they appointed a successor from within. They had their eye on somebody who was rising through the ranks and made sure that that person absorbed the charism of mercy and knew how a mercy hospital would be run. And when the last sister was ready to retire, that person was appointed by the board to take over.
And did they stay mercy hospitals?
Well,
Or
right.
did they go more public?
Well, they're not public. There are several very large Catholic health systems now. So these charisms of, the Mercies or the Sisters of St. Joseph or the Daughters of Charity have merged, and the emphasis now is more on Catholic health care than on individual orders hospital systems.
So are you going to publish your results? Are
They
you hoping
were
to be
published last fall.
Are you hoping to be a chapter now in these books?
Well, that's actually part of that's step 3. I'm on step 2 right now because I am going back to a subset of the original sample and interviewing them about how do you think it happened that nobody noticed this? What were the factors that suppressed the accomplishments of these very, very talented women? One of the things I did during the sabbatical was I nominated Mother Carmelita Manning, who founded the original Mercy College and the high school and that campus, and oversaw the operation of, at one point, 25 Mercy hospitals. She had a system before there were systems, and she is now a recognized member of the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. So that was one thing. And then phase 2 is this set of interviews about what were the factors that kept you from getting credit for this. And the third step is the one that you just described. I have a list now of textbook authors, and actually it's in order of perceived susceptibility. I picked up a couple of them and I thought, these people seem like they might be open to this, and to write the text that goes in the book and puts the missing piece in place.
I hope you succeed.
So, that's what I enjoy besides the teaching. So I've got a lot on my agenda. I'll be there for a while, I hope.
Over the course of this interview, have we really touched on all the different jobs you've had? I'm not 100% sure.
Probably not.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, let me think. I was a high school teacher first, and then
And what high school?
actually we had an academy in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay.
And so I was there. I was at a Catholic Central High School in Port Huron, and then I was at Immaculata just down the street from us
Yeah.
in Detroit, at the point when the school went from all white to all black. So that was a really interesting time to be there for. After that, I was asked to become treasurer of the Sisters of Mercy province of Detroit. And so I served in that capacity for 6 years with my brand new MBA. I went from that role into the health system itself. The health system was called Mercy Health Services,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the first president, the founding president of what was called Mercy Services for Aging. Right now, today, the facility that we're sitting in is managed by what's called Trinity Health, and the long-term care piece of Trinity Health is what grew out of Mercy Services for Aging. So that was a point at which the health system wanted to diversify. They needed somebody in charge that would be flexible enough to figure out the new piece. And so we pulled together nursing homes and residences for seniors under this Mercy Services for Aging. And that's 25 years old now. So from there, largely because of a family situation, my dad was aging and needed me not to be traveling all over to meetings. That's when I went to COTS. And I was there for 5 years as the controller. We had a pretty simple arrangement, the executive director and I. I was in charge of the money, including getting it, and she was in charge of everything else. And we did it that way for 5 years, and it was a wonderful run. And then things had stabilized there, and so somebody else was able to come in and take over. I enjoy starting things and troubleshooting, and so most of what I've done has had a little bit of that in it. Then I worked for the next little period of time with a variety of nonprofits that just needed some organizational help, and it was in that role that I connected with the School of Architecture and the Design Center, which led me then into the full-time ministry at U of D Mercy.
Now the Design Center is still around 25 years, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you set up something really lasting there. One of our last questions is there anything you want to tell us that we haven't asked and you want to expound on?
Well, one of the things that people sometimes don't know about that Mercy College property in the early days is, and it carries over actually to the McNichols campus, is that for us it wasn't just the college. It was the place where women gave their lives. And so it might have, the sentimental attachment of, this is the church we were married in. This is where my children were baptized, that kind of thing. So when we look at the artifacts that came over to the McNichols campus, it's a wonderful connection for us. In the College of Health Professions atrium, we have all of those beautiful stained glass windows that were removed from the chapel, and they're backlit in the atrium. When we celebrate Mercy Day or some of those things and see on the campus some of the pieces that are there, the sculpture and that kind of thing, or even, I don't know if you know this, but there were 2 lovely statues of the Blessed Mother and St. Joseph in the chapel that was demolished after we left the campus. St. Joseph went to engineering. Can you think of a better place for a carpenter to be?
Yeah, exactly.
And the Blessed Mother one is the one in health professions. But I think there are lots of signs of connections with Mercy College that are physical reminders, but I think, the spirit has come over too. And I think the Jesuits have been very welcoming of the integration. It started formally with the consolidation, but I think, the 2 groups of us on campus function more like one group now. And that's really good. We have, regular connections with the Jesuit community, and I think we all enjoy that. So I like to think that not just the artifacts, but the spirit has transferred through the consolidation and to the new location.
Do you have a favorite story or a memory about your time while you were at Mercy College? Now, you were there as a student.
I was there as a student.
Right. So.
And I was there as a student for the first year, and then the second year we came out here for our canonical year, and then I went back and finished up
so
commuting.
You were there for
but
years.
The story that pops into my mind really largely because I've been thinking a lot about Sister Kenise, who just died recently. When I was in college, people used to get through college in 4 years, and it was a pretty standard program. But if you took a year off to be a canonical novice, it sort of threw everything out of sequence. And so it took you 5 years, but sometimes the courses you needed weren't offered. So at one point, I was trying to get one more 3-credit course of English in, and I went to Sister Kenise. And she was on the faculty at that point. And I said, would you consider a proposal? And she said, what? And she was teaching linguistics, and it conflicted head-on with another course I needed to graduate. And I was interested, as most students are, in graduating in a timely fashion. So I proposed that I attend the first class, do all the work, meet with her periodically, and come back and take the final for a linguistics class.
More of a directed study.
She said, let me think about that. A couple of days later, she came back and said, we'll do it, but you have to meet with me weekly. And we met in a screened-in porch that was over the entrance to the back of the administration. I don't know if anybody ever looked up and saw it,
No.
but it was part of the convent. And so every week I looked forward to this one-on-one meeting with one of the best faculty members that we had, where she would, just check that I was taking in the information about linguistics and doing the work. And the most fun about the whole arrangement, though, was when I showed up for the final, because no one else in the class had actually registered that I was there. And so I arrived for the final, took it, passed it, got the course credit. But I think there must still be people puzzled about where she came from and how that happened.
Exactly. Are there any other questions?
I don't think you had talked about teaching high school. What drew you more to? And the reason I'm asking is we just came from Sister Karen, who taught elementary school, and she loved the fourth graders. Is there something in particular that drew you to high school, or was it just?
I think what I've discovered over the years is the older they are, the better it works for me. So I had subbed actually for a week in a first grade. You don't want to hear those stories. And then I had to teach half a year, 7th and 8th grade, and you don't want those either. And so I was actually prepared. My first degree actually was in French, and I was teaching. I know it's unlikely for a Kelly, but I was teaching high school French because I liked the language. And university is really better. It's the best of all.
Now, the Sisters of Mercy don't steer you into a particular program?
That used to happen.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the way you used to find out what you were doing was on August 16th, you'd go up and pick up a little envelope off the altar and pull out the card, and it would tell you where you were missioned for the following year. But again, coming into the community at the point that I did, that only happened to me once. And then the next year, it was more of a discussion. And then we got to a point within 5 years where you would do the investigating about what positions would be open and would be a good match. And then you took it to the person in charge of the community and proposed that assignment.
Well, that's a major shift.
It was.
That's
and
a
for people that
major
were used to the envelope system,
paradigm
to
shift.
deal with
Yeah.
assessing openings and whether there was a good match, that was a big change.
So the envelope, was it? It wasn't addressed specifically to you. It was what you pulled is what.
No, it was addressed to you.
Oh, okay.
It was addressed to you. So you'd go up and your envelope would have your name on it. And there were just little envelopes, and you'd pull out the little card, and it would say, you are missioned to Port Huron Catholic High School, French teacher for the academic year, such and such.